All right, so we have enough people joining us. Fantastic. Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to all the lovely people who have joined in today. You must be wondering, why do I have this blindfold on? So I'm going to just start with a line that's very familiar. I think all of us have heard it. Love is blind. Yeah, you all have heard it. Just give me a thumbs up. You may not agree with it, but if you all have heard it, you just give me a thumbs up. Okay. So, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Lovely. So, we've all heard that love is blind. But do we realize that our judgments could also be blind? The choices that we make, the decisions that we make could also have a blind spot. Now, I'm going to explain this further and see where this is coming from through a quick poll. So, we are going to begin the question with a quick poll and see where this blind spot is really coming from. For that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Colleen, to do the poll.
Thank you, Mishti, for starting the session with such a mindful thought. And here we have our first poll. That poll states most people have some bias or the other. Do you agree? If yes, no, maybe, or you never thought of it. So, whatever you feel fit, you have a minute, think about it, and waiting for your answers. For the ones who just joined in, quickly we can start with this poll. Most people have some or the other biases. If you agree, then click yes, no, maybe, never thought of it. Seems like everyone has answered. And with that, I'm ending the poll.
All right. So, yes, 96% agree that most people have some bias or the other. So, let's look at the second poll and then we'll arrive at what we are wanting to talk about today.
So, on the contrary, we always feel that I have fewer biases than others. And what are your opinions about that? Mm, seems like people are not thinking. Another 10 seconds. And we have the results.
Okay, that's interesting. So we have 32% who feel that they have fewer biases than others, and 36% feel that maybe, I mean, they are still reflecting on it, and 24% feel that they do not have fewer biases than others. Okay, but mostly majority are towards maybe or yes, they feel they have fewer biases than others. So Gulleen, thank you so much for organizing this poll, and it brings us to an understanding that most of us agree that biases are there, and a lot of us also agree that we have fewer biases than others. So this also brings us to the concept of the bias blind spot. So the bias blind spot essentially says that we feel that we have less biases than others. If you look at Twitter or any social media platform, and typically, we'll feel that others are more opinionated. With all the comments, you feel that, yeah, probably, they have more biases than you do. So biases are there all around us. Biases are ingrained in the mental and social fabric, and they do have a blind spot. But the first step of inclusion is to own the concept of bias, to own that, yes, biases are there, because awareness is the first step of transformation. This forum inclusion circles will not only talk about just biases, but it will talk about some powerful stories of inclusion, transformation. And before I go further, I'm going to invite my colleague and co-host, Aman Zaidi, to tell you what inclusion circles really is. So over to Aman.
Thanks, Mishti, and hi again, everyone. So, inclusion circles, the why and what of it is this. Inclusion circles are essentially safe spaces for professionals to actually come in and have a conversation around topics that have to do with inclusion, diversity, bias, etc. Right? So they can talk about their own experiences, their challenges, their practices, and we want to create an atmosphere where it is safe to have these sometimes tricky conversations. So that's really what inclusion circles is. The idea is to move beyond bias and towards more belonging. So that's what we are. The flow of the event usually is like this: that we have a guest, and with the guest we begin with an interview, and during which we actually get to hear their stories around their own experiences, personal and professional. What kind of practices they have put into place that have helped in the DEI field. And after that interview, after that conversation, we morph into a forum for all of us to share our experiences and thoughts with respect to inclusion, right? On that note, it is time to introduce our guest for today.
Thank you, Aman. And the pleasure of introducing our guest today, that is mine. I'm very excited to include and invite our guest, Priyanka Nambudiri. Priyanka, have I pronounced your name right?
Absolutely right, Vishti. Better than a lot of people,
Yeah, so I've been practicing this since yesterday, like I said. So I'm glad I've got it right now. For our audiences here, Priyanka Nambudiri leads the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda for the global business services at IBM. And she's very passionate about the subject. I remember having a conversation with Priyanka once where she said that we encourage our employees to bring their whole selves to work. And that statement really stayed with me. And I'm going to encourage Priyanka to bring her whole self to the forum today and begin this journey by telling us about her journey, her passion for inclusion. So over to you, Priyanka. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Mishti, and thank you so much, Aman and Gurleen, for having me here. Like, I would say it's my privilege and my honor to be here. Thanks again for that. So yes, I mean, talking about, let me be very honest here. Okay, so I have asked this journey question to a lot of women leaders who I have seen it, who've done it all, seen it all. And they always have a very inspiring stories to tell about, how they have done what they've done and how they have gotten to where they have gotten to. But each time I am asked this question, I don't think I do justice to us at all. But like every other time, I'm going to try today, and I'm going to try my best. So it may not be, it may not inspire in that inspirational way, but I think it may just trigger some different thinking in people, who are with us here today. So yeah, so that's the disclaimer I wanted to start with, so set my expectations right. Now, so I think for me, my journey has been a lot about self-discovery. Who I really am, and accepting myself the way I am, and finally learning to love who I am. So just stepping back a little, in my early life. So first 20 years of my life were lived in Patna. I am from Patna, and that's where I was born and raised. I've seen both my parents work, and I was raised in a very loved and protected environment. And I would say that uh, that's one of my first privileges in life, uh, and I'm very grateful for that. So I'm a Punjabi from Patna, married to a Malayali, raised in Bombay, and now we're raising a teenager together who loves his butter chicken and upperman stew, all the same. So 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 that's the cultural identity that we have today. Different regions, different languages, and different places, and we have moved cities for work. Chennai, I've stayed there for 10 years, more than 10 years, worked in Mumbai, worked now in Bangalore for the last 7 years. And for most part of my career, I've been into consulting and change management, to be specific. Advising clients on how to deal with the changes that they're going through, all the big fancy transformation that they run in terms of their business processes and whatnot. And interestingly, when I look back, uh, look back at all the work that I did with my clients, that was still far easier, because at a personal level, I have always found it very hard to deal with any change. So it was, like a dichotomy for me that, I'm something else with my clients, and I'm totally different, with, as a person, because uh, here I'm advising my clients on, how to run a new process, or, how do you handle a people change during an M&A. And when I have a small system change, say a new version of Excel comes in, or a small change in my life comes in, and I'm like all jitters. So that's the kind of person I used to be. And and as I said just a bit ago, that for me the journey has been more about finding and discovering my own self, and all the experiences that I've had, good or bad, or all the connections that I've made, friends, peers, my family, everyone, personal, professional. So people I've been with, places I've lived in, they've contributed to this discovery. And obviously it never happens overnight, right? So I don't know. So and when I look back, at my growing years, and when I say growing years, it's after 20. So till 20, I say I was raised. After 20 is when I think I started growing up. So I have, been a person of extremes. The way I used to look at things, the way I used to respond to things. So everything used to be in black and white for me. It was very binary, very 0 and 1. So either ecstatic or totally miserable. But over time, I mean, as you grow up, right, you see things around yourself, and you see people uh, going through what they're going through, and sometimes you don't experience it directly, but you learn from their experiences, and then you see that there will be shades of grays, there will be shades of pink and blue and so many different shades. And it's not only accepting that there will be different shades of people, it's about respecting them and embracing them. So that's my journey so far been, like, where I have learned to not only accept that things will not always be black and white, and things will not always be in my control. So I don't know how many people, I mean, I don't mind sharing it, but I have always been a control freak. I like things in a certain order. Okay, I used to like things in a certain order, and I would go haywire, all over the place, if I would see that things are not how I want them, whether at work or whether at home. And I'm trying to let go, and I try to stay attached, but get detached, not get too emotional about things, and I think my husband compliments me in this whole thing where, uh, I mean, we are totally different people. And I think I've learned that there's no point stressing over things after a point. So, and I think the pandemic has shown us, right, that the world that we live in is very transient, right? So, I mean, live in the moment and love the moment. I mean, that's what I'm doing. So that's what I think I mean I am about. As I said, it may not inspire, but it may tell people that there are, there are people like me around, who feel such way. And uh, you know in the past, I think I have been someone, again, it all stems from the fact that, I used to love to control things. And I used to be a very black and white person. I have always been very hypercritical of my own self, pushing myself to do more and be more. And you know and this whole wanting to be more and do more, this feeling did not come from seeking perfection. It came from the feeling that you're not enough. And I used to feel that way, that I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. So and and I think that started when I started working, like I wanted to do it all. And I got married, and then uh, things were a little different, but still, I thought I can do anything, women can do it all. That's what we used to hear from people. And I used to hear people, say, oh, you're a superwoman, you can do anything. And now when someone calls me a superwoman, you have to see how I react. I hate it. So when I just thought about this whole, superwoman concept, I thought that it's uh, it's about it's a term which has been devised for convenience. And it's been designed not for our convenience, but for someone else's convenience. So I don't know if you're getting it, but it's not really a compliment. It's something which just tells you that someone just pushes it on you. I mean, I don't know how many women would want to be a superwoman, right? I would never want to be. I would want to be like anybody else, doing all the normal things, right? We don't have any magic wand here, right? So it's just an excuse that people give for not doing what they should be doing, in the first place. So I stay away from this. I have shed this superwoman tag long back in my life. And for me, my journey has been actually from wanting to be a superwoman to being a woman. And now it's just about being, from, so it's like a reverse revolution. So, so that's the thing. And I think all this comes from, again, a lot of self-awareness, which probably comes with age, which probably comes from experience, which probably comes from making mistakes, faltering. And I have done that. I have done that in my professional career. I have done that in my personal life. So, and I mean, for the benefit of all women who are there, right? I would also want to say that it's come from all the stereotypes that we live with, right? What is it that women can do? What is it that men can do, right? I mean, as I said, right? So we don't have any magic wand with us. I mean, we work hard like anybody else, and we want everyone to work hard, like just like us. So it's just these biases and stereotypes that make men and women look different, right? Uh, it's high time, we revisited all this. I mean, I just don't believe that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. It's not my thing at all. So yeah, I mean, I think that's about me. It's just about accepting that I am perfectly flawed, and loving my flawed self finally.
That's wonderful, Priyanka. Some beautiful sharing. And I would like to congratulate you that you have an inclusive home, an inclusive family. You are balancing two cultures and doing it so beautifully. So diversity and inclusion right at at your home. So that is fantastic. And also another thing that you spoke about is trying to do away with the superwoman tag and the label and the expectation, because women tend to measure themselves based on social identity rather than self identity. You
Yeah.
know, am I the good bahu? Am I the good mother? And am I the good professional? And that's where, you know, the guilt syndrome really comes in. Am I good enough? So just shifting focus from social identity to self identity is really important. And to embrace self identity, it begins with acceptance, and it begins with just accepting yourself perfectly the way you are, flawed or not flawed. It's just that I think all of us are phenomenal regardless of gender. So over to Aman for the next question.
Thanks, Priyanka. Thank you so much for sharing with such you know such vulnerability and authenticity your journey so far. And I think what it's done is that it's resonating with many of us. There are some people in the chat who have already started saying, okay, been there. And when I was hearing what you were saying, even I felt, okay, yeah, been there. So here's a follow-up question, if you'll allow it. Well, exploration, if you'll allow it. uh, when you're trying to be authentically you, when you're trying to be your whole self, uh, in a setup, especially in a work setup that actually wants you to be Superman or Superwoman, how do you balance those two needs? Your own need for to be yourself, to make certain choices, and working in a setup that may actually want significantly more out of you. Do you have any thoughts on that for us? How do you manage that? Oops, I think Priyanka, the internet connection may be. Oh, so we'll have to wait till she gets back. All right, we will. But in the meantime, people, if you have, while we are waiting for Priyanka to come back, do you have a quick comment to make about what you've heard so far? Put it in the chat box. Let us read it.
Yeah,
Oh,
there she
Priyanka's
is.
back. Good.
Yeah, there she is. So it's perfectly okay for technology to be flawed as well at times, on that note.
Priyanka, sorry, you're on mute at
You're
the
on
moment.
mute.
Yes. So I said I'm back now, and I will not want to apologize for technology on behalf of technology.
Yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
did you catch my question?
No, not really. If you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. What I was saying is, you shared your story, and I think it resonated with a lot of us. And I'm just conscious of the fact that one layer of inclusion is, okay, I want to choose to be myself. I want to bring my whole self into this world. However, you may actually be operating in environments that may have different expectations from you. So your choice is, okay, I want to be me. And you may actually be working in an environment that wants you to be Superwoman or Superman. How have you dealt with that at work?
Okay. So again, Aman, see, there is no right or wrong way of dealing with it, right? And there were times when I had to like kind of fake it that I'm a superwoman and I can do it, I can do anything. And I faked it till a point when I thought that it's killing me. I'm killing myself over and over again, whether it's a client presentation, whether it's a client meeting, or whether it's my child unwell at home, and juggling balls and spinning plates every single day, right? And then comes a point in your life when you decide, okay, this is not happening. I need to just slow down, right? So either you face that moment in your life, so something is forcing you to take that call that, okay, this is not for me, I need to have boundaries. Or you proactively decide, before I reach that point of breakdown, I want to define my boundaries. I want to have a boundary. And at the same time, I think it's very important for us to uh, accept the fact that there will never be any balance, whether it is work, whether it is life, it's always like a seesaw. The most important thing is that we learn to prioritize. Sometimes family comes first because there's something which is on the fire on the home front. Sometimes work comes first because there's something on the fire on the work front. So we need to take the call. And for me, I think what has worked is that you have your village setup for you to count on, whether it is somebody at work, whether it's your, whether it's family, husband, spouse, partner, I mean, extended family, whoever it is, right? So you need to see if you want to do 5 things, you should just make sure that you have all the resources in place, right? And these are my resources, these are my human resources, basically my set of family and friends and whoever I can count on and lean in on. And another thing which has helped me is to be you know be open with people. So if I'm at work and I'm having some challenges at home and I need to come back, I'm very this is bothering me, and I have that relationship with few people at work, uh, who are like my mentors or someone I can confide in. I can say that uh, you know not help me out, but listen to me, and like just let me just take it off my heart. So it's important to have such people in your lives. I mean, personally, it's easy, but at work it's not easy. But I mean, there's no harm, like to be, if you can get someone like that who you can just confide in, so that there's someone who knows that okay, this is what is going on with you. And as I said, that whole work-life concept is like a fairy tale. It doesn't exist in real world. So we need to make choices. And when I talk about choices, I think I always say that uh, I mean, go with what you have chosen, right? Because it's ultimately your choice. So I mean, I tell this to my son, when he says, okay, you did it, you told me. And so I tell him that don't blame others for the choices that you make in life.
Yeah.
Stand by them. And the whole concept of inclusion, right? We talk about these upstanders and allies, right? So again, it comes back to us. So we have to stand for what we believe in, what we are going through, and take responsibility for it. And that's what it is. I don't know if I answered your question or I've just gone all over the place, but yeah.
No, I think some fabulous points in there, Priyanka, at least for me personally, and I'm sure the chat is also suggesting that it's resonating with people. Here are some of the things that I've heard. The concept of work-life balance is a myth. I've heard that before. There's one of my favorite thinkers on the planet, a guy called Marcus Buckingham, who says, look, it's not work-life balance, it's love and loathe balance. There's stuff that you love, which you want to do, and there's stuff that you loathe that you don't want to do. And you got to strike that balance. And I think that's actually a more useful way of looking at things. The other thing I heard is you got to make choices. And I think that's a great point. You make choices to do certain things. You make choices not to do certain things. And those are the choices that can help you find the kind of balance that works for you. I think that's another interesting point I heard. A third very interesting point you made was, look, you can always rely on your village, on your social network. It can be family, it can be friends, it can be co-workers, and it's important to engage with them, to call upon them, to just talk and unload on them. And this is an aspect that, personally, it's been very regrettable that it's taken us so many decades of working and 1.5 years of a pandemic to wake up to the fact that the importance of just having people to talk to. And I'm glad that we're waking up to this. And I think thanks for making that point as well. So wonderful points out there. A fourth point, which you made, was very interesting. You talked about how you feel. You talked about the feeling aspect when you're actually struggling, when you're trying to fit in to the social expectations, when you're not being able to authentically bring your whole self out there, and the whole struggle that you feel with not being yourself and constantly trying to fit in. And it reminds me of something. Many of us, we look at inclusion as a policy. Many of us, we look at diversity and inclusion as a practice. We forget that inclusion is a feeling. Yes, and the entire practice and the entire field is to engender that feeling in more and more people. So I think thank you for bringing that fact to the fore. So yeah.
I mean, what you said, it makes a lot of sense to me. Yes, inclusion is a feeling, right? It's the feeling. it's what we feel and it's what people feel around us. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing that.
So yes, I very well said, Aman and Priyanka. Inclusion is a feeling, and it's a feeling to have a sense of belonging to a group, to a place. So it comes from that. So Aman also spoke about processes and some systems, and how the struggle is to share your whole self at work. Now, I would also want to talk about something else. While you're managing the processes and the people and balancing the whole act of the feeling of inclusion, and yet, trying to create a system, it becomes very tricky to manage both. Because, there is this cognitive psychologist called George Miller, who talks about the magic Miller number. He says the short term memory can hold up to 7 items. And when you have such limited room for information, one tends to then operate from one's biases or operate from what the existing systems are to manage inclusion. So does that become tricky to balance people and inclusion and to stick to the system? So what are your experiences or challenges around that?
so Mishti, I mean, these challenges will always be there, right? Because it's when we look at diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging and everything. So uh, it's vastly complex, and it's not only complex because we are dealing with representation, but it's even more complex because we are dealing with how people feel, right? How or the sense of belonging that people have. So these challenges will always be there. I think what's more important, especially talking from an organization perspective and working with IBM for 11 years and seeing how we have grown or we have evolved in our journey of inclusion. Uh, I think the starting point is always to get your problem statement right. What is it that you're trying to do? Policies come later, systems come later, right? You have your people, you want to make sure that they feel included. And if you see that your people they look similar, they talk similar. So basically if it's a homogeneous group, then your problem is that you need to have more diverse people, right? So it starts with getting your problem statement right. What is your why, right? Yeah. So fix your why, and then fix the what and the how. So what I see with some of the clients we work with here, right? So and fortunately for me, my journey with in this role, with IBM has been smooth enough because one, it's 100+ year old company, and there are a lot of things. Again, I would call it my privilege, that a lot of things have been given to me on a platter when it comes to D&I, because we have made sure that we have defined a problem statement right, and we've made sure that DEI is not run as an HR initiative. But what I see with some of our clients when I work with them, and so a lot of people, they don't really know why they're doing it. They want to do it because they think it's the right thing to do, because it just gives them it's like a check in the box for them. So ensuring that it's not a check in the box for them, understanding why you really need diversity in place. A lot of people even come back to me and say, okay, you know what, enough of diversity, enough of numbers, let's talk about inclusion. I tell them, you've got it all wrong, because you really need to fix your diversity problem, because diversity is about representation, and representation is not only about numbers. Representation, the word, if you think about it, right, it means that is your organization representative of the society you live in? Is it representative of the world that you live in? If the world has 50% women, do you even have 30% women? So I tell them, let's not have this conversation that I am done with the diversity agenda, let's talk about inclusion. So diversity is very important, and inclusion is as important. So again, as I said, going back to what I said, getting your problem statement right. So that's something which people should fix. Second, making sure that everybody has their skin in the game. But especially when we talk about inclusion, right? So it's a culture, it's the way people feel. It's the kind of things people talk, in their canteens and pantries, and it's the kind of conversations managers have. So it's that whole ecosystem, right? It's the environment. So especially when you want to create, a culture of inclusion, it's always best to obviously, I mean, you will run a program or something which will tell you that this is where you are, this is where you have to be, this is what your future state looks like, these are the gaps you have to plug in, and blah, blah, and all that from a program management perspective. But then what I'm trying to say is that what's really important here is when we talk about inclusion, it's about co-creation. You create it along with people you're creating it for. You create it with the employees, you create it for the managers with the managers. So it's about for and with. It goes hand in hand, because you don't give culture on a platter, right? Okay, that this is the culture that we have, now go take it, work, work in it or work for it, right? It's about creating that whole little village inside the organization, and you do it together. So sounds philosophical, but we have tried this and it kind of works for us.
That's wonderful. I'm just going to ask a follow-up question on that. You did speak about, moving the needle from diversity to inclusion, and you spoke about how important representation is. So when we talk about representation, a lot of the organization have their focus on gender, on women for representation. Are we leaving the other sections of society out? Or is the focus on women too much? So that is something I wanted to ask you.
I love your question. I love the latter part of your question,
Yes.
So,
and there's another part to that question. So like someone said, inclusion of expats, inclusion of veterans, inclusion of disability, inclusion of other expressions of gender. So representation.
And if I can add to that, Mishti, for a moment, because we have a couple of questions in chat also saying, groups that we may not have the courage to talk about, but let's say scheduled castes, tribes,
Yes.
Other backward classes.
Absolutely.
Are we paying attention to their, representation as well?
Wonderful.
Sorry,
wonderful.
Carry on, Mishti.
Yes. Thank you, Aman, for bringing that in. Yes. So can we broaden the horizon for representation and not just make it a very focused agenda? Everyone is talking about women, so we'll just focus on gender as representation. Another aspect, when you spoke about conversations in the canteen, or trying to create your own little village of inclusion in an organization, then a lot of organizations focus on resource groups, to address the needs of the village. But with resource groups, intersectionality doesn't really happen. It becomes, little pockets in the village. So how do we harmonize that? How do we create more intersectionality? So two aspects to the question. How do we broaden the horizon on representation? And how do we create more intersectionality?
So, no, great questions, Vishti. And your questions are actually very forward-looking, I would say. And I think I want to talk about IBM, and then I'll also talk about some of the other organizations that I've seen closely, both good and bad aspects. So if I have to look at IBM as an organization, so it's far more mature than a lot of organizations when it comes to the DEI practices that we have. And for us, the focus is not only on gender. I mean, there is a lot that we're trying to address here. We at IBM, we're trying to address bias, sexism, ageism, cognitive diversity, and so much. So for us, when we say representation, we don't only mean gender. And so there is much more than gender when it comes to diversity. But at the same time, I see that there are organizations who I would rate, who still, getting there or haven't really gotten to the point they should be at from a maturity perspective. If I just have to, plug them or put them on the maturity model of DEI. they're not there yet. So they start with gender. And frankly, if you ask me, there's nothing wrong with it, right? It's a big problem that we have to fix. So it's just about, being sure about, as an organization, making sure that everybody has a shared understanding of what you really want to do in this space. It could be gender, there's no problem with it, but then you address gender, now what next, right? So it's a process of evolution, I would say. You cannot leave gender and move to something else. I mean, I would not do that, right? Because that is a big problem, especially in India, right? So you fix a problem, you make sure that it's kind of getting BAU, you move to the next one. And I agree that, and I totally agree with you that there is far more to diversity and inclusion than gender is. And obviously a lot of people feel that way, that they feel that it's not about women. I have seen women's group running events for women, celebrating Women's Day, men missing, other genders missing, right? So it's their problem which they have to solve, right? So DEI will never work this way, right? So it's all about breaking any kind of diverseness together, and making them feel that they belong there, right? So it could be someone, who is neurodiverse, right? You bring that person in, you bring, I mean, and for that matter, let me tell you. So this is interesting because I speak about it, with our new associates who join us every month. That one, I mean, diversity is not about gender, and gender is not about women, right? So if you think about that whole gender spectrum, right? So men and women are two ends, right? So if women are diversity, men equally are diversity, right? It's just that they are two ends, and there is, and you have various dimensions of gender which runs along. So I would never go with that notion that, okay, are we doing too much for women? We haven't done enough, frankly speaking, and it's ironic that we are still struggling to get this basic right, get the foundation right. There is so much of work that we want to do, in the world for people from the LGBTQ plus community, people who have diverse abilities, people who think differently. I mean, that's the world I imagine, I look forward to, where we're not even talking about these things like the way we are talking about today, right? So it happens naturally, it happens consciously, and it happens very intentionally, and still it's just the most natural way of doing things.
Wonderfully said, Priyanka. It happens very naturally. And that's, that is the same concept we were talking about earlier, about the bias blind spot. So if we have a bias towards wide representation only towards women, or biases anywhere, there is a social psychologist, Emily Cronin, who speaks about this concept about blind spot, bias blind spot, and she says that we feel that we are less biased. So it's very important to kind of just acknowledge that, and also just really celebrate the fact that it's not men versus women here, right? It's
Absolutely.
yeah, and it's about collaborative gender roles. It's about allyship, and that's where the maturity comes in as a society and as a workplace, where we are embracing diversity with concepts of inclusion. So on that note, I over to the next question.
Thank you. I'm just going to do a very tiny follow-up of that, Priyanka, if you'll allow it. There's a question in chat from my friend Shweta, who says, is the focus at IBM significantly different now? Is it because in the past, IBM has actually focused a lot on gender and moved the needle significantly? Is that why it's happening now, that it's been able to expand their focus?
It's again, there is no single reason why, but the whole, IBM is it's giant, right? It's 110 years, in fact, even more than that, right? So, I mean, almost 100 years ago, we hired our first set of 3 women employees. I think that was, I don't even remember. So maybe early 1900s. So the whole point is that our journey with diversity and inclusion started much earlier than uh, anybody else I can think of, any other organization I can think of. And the fact that we started much early, uh, we could see that when we hire people uh, who come from diverse backgrounds, it could be their gender, it could be their thinking, it could be their ethnicity, it could be anything, right? So when we hired them in the first place, we could see that the amount of creativity, amount of talent that they're bringing in, right? So that's what they get valued for. I mean, I don't think I'm valued for being a woman as such, right? I mean, I'm valued for the individual that I am. And when you start your journey early on, right, you learn, you make mistakes, what's the next thing that you want to do. So obviously, to answer your question, yes, we started our journey very early on, and we knew where we wanted to be, and uh, we still know that there is a lot that we have to do. We haven't done enough. In fact, it's never enough when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equity. Uh, and just to tell you, or just to share with you, that there are some things which are more recent at IBM. I mean, I haven't. So when I joined IBM 11 years ago, I mean, I knew that, okay, there's something called diversity and inclusion. I never heard anybody talk about equity. People are talking about equity. So I mean, that's the kind of maturity the organization has. Our leaders talk about things like privileges. Our leaders talk about equity, as I said. Our leaders talk about, and why just a leader? So Mishti, you were talking about this whole self, bringing your whole self to work, right? So and let me tell you, it's not only IBM that talks about it. There are many organizations that in some fashion or the other say that we enable our employees to bring their full selves, best selves, themselves to work. So what we do when we say whole self to work, we also make sure that our employees understand what it means when you were to do the other thing, as in when you were to cover yourself, whole self versus covered self. So we have conversations like that. We have we do, we get our employees together, we talk about these things, give them examples. We have leaders who talk about when they had to cover a part of themselves. I talk about the fact that when I joined IBM, I had to cover the fact that I was a mom. I was a young mom who had just returned from sabbatical, because I did not know how this would be perceived, whether I would get, exciting client engagements like anybody else, my peers, right? So I would never talk about this little toddler I had left home, and I would always hide the fact that, I'm returning from a sabbatical into a consulting place, But then obviously, things changed, and the organization matured and everything, right? So again, yeah. So to answer back your question, right? So it's all about, getting your why right and then working towards it. So for us, our why is to make sure that our employees understand what it is to bring your whole self, and what it is also not to, bring your whole self to work. So
Wonderful.
Thanks so much for answering that for us, Priyanka. The chat is really heating up. I've got
Yes.
wonderful questions in there
Yes,
from
absolutely.
Gayatri, Divya, from Vaishali. And, I think what we should do is move this interview ahead and then move it to the, Q&A section, so everybody can
Yes.
get those answers
Aman,
done.
Aman,
Yes.
what I was thinking is we could just take 2 questions from the chat right now. Then we move on
Uh-huh.
to your question and the questions that are there. Then after that, this is to the whole group. We have a sharing space, because there is a lot coming up, I can see, and a lot of you are getting passionate and motivated to say a lot of things. So we have a sharing space for that. It's just that right now we'll take 2 questions, and then we'll move on to closing the interview and opening the forum for a discussion. So there was one question which was there, that why do organizations fail while making the organization more inclusive? So if you could just answer that, that's one question. And Aman, is there another question from the chat that you want to take? We are taking two questions right now, and then we move on.
Yeah, I think the question that you picked, which is Divya's question, and I
Hmm.
think a related question to that is the one that Vaishali asked, which is,
Mhm.
can you share some examples of D&I mature and evolved sectors and organizations? So one, of course, I think Divya is asking, okay, why do organizations fail?
Hmm.
To ensure inclusion. And I think Vaishali wants to know, do you have examples of orgs and sectors that have done well? So
Yes.
any thoughts on that, Priyanka?
Okay, so the first question, right? So why do organizations fail on their DEI journey? I think the first thing that comes to my mind. Okay, so this question is from
Divya.
Divya. So the first thing that comes to my mind, Divya, is that uh, you know I would say that when you start thinking about DEI or diversity, inclusion, equity as a project or as an initiative, you have failed already. You know, so if you start thinking about it as a program, you have failed already. So what you have to think about, you have to make sure that one, everybody has a common understanding of what this is. And in my mind, uh, DEI should be like a DNA of the organization. It's something that should run in the blood. It's something which you cannot do without. So never ever. So if organizations think about running a DEI because it's a fad, it's a trend, it's a good thing to do because someone else is doing it, because competitors are doing it, you failed already. So it should never be looked at as an initiative. That's first thing. Second, it should never be run as an HR initiative, and we've made sure of that in IBM. It's for us, we run it in collaboration, in equal partnership with business, business teams, support functions. I mean, the entire organization is working together to drive diversity inclusion. And the reason being, it's again, as I said, it's a culture, right? You fix your representation and you give them that space to thrive, and that's what the diversity inclusion is. So everyone has to have their skin in the game, and if they don't have, we have failed already. Now another thing I think would be that fixing the mindsets. So if you have people who question that, I'm all for diversity, because I've heard people say this, I want diversity, but I don't want to lower the bar, because it's all about merit or meritocracy. You have failed already. So uh, it's important to, fix those mindsets and make sure that people don't think that way about diversity, because uh, I really don't know why someone would ever think like that, but there are people who think like that. They think it's diversity versus meritocracy. It's like saying, okay, if I'm getting in more diversity in shape of women, or in shape of, say, someone from an LGBTQ plus community, or in shape of someone who is autistic, I am kind of compromising on uh, our performance, or our productivity, or everything that we do, right? And that's a totally inaccurate statement, right? So I mean, the whole idea is that diversity adds to what you're doing, right? It's additive, it's not deductive. So it's about fixing that mindset, to start with, because you roll something out and you still have people who feel that way, right? You are not going to succeed. So it's just about making sure that people understand why it's needed in the first place. And when I come across people, I come across clients who think this way, or who question, okay, let's get down to doing a business case. This is what I say, that you have all the business case available on Google. You can look out, right? But uh, to me, it makes a very human sense. It's a very moral sense. It's just the right thing to do. And um, you want numbers, we give you numbers, but then think deeply about it, right? I don't see anybody asking for a business case for a homogeneous group, that let's bring all like-minded people together because they're going to be absolutely creative. I don't see that, right? So I don't know why someone has to question why we need diverse set of people. So that's what it is. So uh, just to sum up what I was trying to say, that it's important that while you have your numbers, be confident enough to put your case forward that it's just the right thing to do, right? And never make it an HR initiative. It never works that way. And get your why right, the problem that you're trying to fix to start with, and then start progressing on that journey of inclusion.
Absolutely. Getting the why right, I think, is paramount.
Yeah, I think, fabulous point. So, I think by saying that getting your why right is really important. Don't just do it because everybody else is doing it, because like you said, you fail. You don't have a genuine goal in mind. You're just doing it. So that could lead to failure, and, assuming that can be tucked under HR somewhere rather than having CEO, CXO focus. I think that's also a great point there, Priyanka. These are things that can differentiate between success or failure of these initiatives. Just quickly also, any comment on the sectors and companies that are doing well, are evolved or mature on DEI?
So, see, technology sector is one. I mean, I see most of organizations, somewhere, I wouldn't say top right, on the graph, but they're getting along there. And yeah, so it's the IT sector which is doing pretty well here. I mean, much better than anybody else.
All right, great. It'll be interesting to also explore at some point how government is functioning.
Vishali, you were saying something.
Yeah, I was just wondering if Priyanka would want to address if there's any comment about the finance sector or the banking sector, so to speak, or let's say the pink collar jobs, the media jobs, right? So there were mostly women there, right? The reporters, pretty faces, delivering news. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks so much for adding that, Vishali. All right, it's been interesting. Thanks for those answers, Priyanka. So here's something you've been talking about. We've been talking about diversity and about numbers, etc. And I also want to turn the lens on on inclusion numbers. So do you have any thoughts around how we can start now measuring inclusion in an organization? We're in an era where there's hyper-connectedness, there's data analytics, there's technology. Have you seen organizations putting some of that to use, or doing whatever they can to measure the state of inclusion in an organization?
So, Aman, what I would think here is that there are different ways of measuring, right? It's about measuring how people feel, how they perceive the organizational culture to be. So it's a measurement of feelings, perceptions, thoughts, and opinions, and everything else, right? It's like a pulse. So, but I can definitely talk about what we do at IBM. So we measure inclusion, and what we've done is that we have clearly defined what inclusion means to us, right? So that's the starting point for any organization. So what are those important dimensions of inclusion that you want to measure? You want to measure employees' perceptions and sentiments around inclusion. So it's about getting your metrics around inclusion right. So it could be how authentic you feel, how authentically you can bring yourself to work, how you're treated, how respected you feel at work. Is the culture inclusive? So we have defined what inclusion means. Then what we did is we framed certain questions around it, and we attached metrics to it. And we do it normally through our surveys, engagement surveys that ask very clear questions to people, what's going on in their minds around these things, like are they able to bring their full selves to work? Are they treated with respect? How fairly are they treated? I'm just giving examples here. How inclusive our culture they perceive it as. So through those questions, we get answers. We get a clear list of actions, things that we need to fix, we need to further improve. So that's something which we do annually. Then we also run something called mini polls or mini pulse. Again, this happens more frequently, and this is again just to gauge how how connected they are with the IBM values, how connected they are with the IBM culture, and how do they feel emotionally and psychologically safe, and do they have a sense of belonging? Do they feel that they matter to us, matter to IBM? So these are those frequent check-ins that we keep doing. And I think next to so this is about measuring inclusion, because this really tells us what's playing on people's mind, and then we get a lot of data, and obviously we have Watson and we have everything, which helps us analyze and see where the gaps are. So in my mind, doing something like this is something which is a non-negotiable. We must do. But next to this, what we also do is that uh, so measuring inclusion in this way will always tell us what is it that we need to fix. So in a way, it's a little reactive. So on a proactive basis, what we do is we want to listen. We try to listen to the employees. What's that aspirational culture that they are looking forward to? It's more like needs versus want. So when we measure inclusion, it tells us this is your current state, and this is what you need to fix to get to the future state which people are thinking about. So that's why I call it reactive. But then when it comes to aspirational thinking, we really want our employees to think about the future. It could be, it could sound insane today, it could sound totally crazy today, but we really want to know, if it were left to them, what kind of culture they would want to be a part of. So that's what our aspirational inclusive culture looks like. And that's what we do when I say we listen to learn to them, and then figure out a way if that's possible. Again, that gives us millions of ideas, and then we see, okay, is this possible? Can we do this? So that's what it is.
Sure. You seem to be talking about ongoing engagement. So inclusion is about a continuous conversation rather than checkpoints every year.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what it is. Great. So I think interesting that you're saying that you're actually taking efforts to check with people on multiple parameters. An interesting thing is that you also mentioned earlier in your one of your answers that we have our own village that we can depend on, people we can rely on, and what we are now beginning to do is we're taking that sociological lens, that network lens to inclusion, and what we are beginning to do is map the networks that individuals and teams have within an organization and see how connected do they feel, who do they feel connected to, who is feeling left out, which which tenure, which age, which gender, which underrepresented group is actually feeling left out or included. So that's another lens that we are taking to inclusion now, and that's also something very, very interesting to look at.
Yeah, this sounds really interesting. Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So
yes, and that lens is also like you said, Priyanka, it's an interesting lens because we also get to understand where the trust is flowing and who are the influencers in the system and where exclusion is happening. So it gives us a holistic picture of the entire network and how important cohesiveness actually is. So so when we are talking about, yes, Aman, you want to add something?
Yeah, no, just I was reminded of what Priyanka just said, saying much of inclusion measurement could be reactive, and can we look at actually a slightly different way of doing it? And this this org lens that we call, if we take that lens to an organization, what we get to do is we measure inclusion as a phenomenon as it takes place in an organization, inclusion in action, not as a factor of how people are feeling about it, or retrospective reporting of inclusion. So I think that could be one answer to what you were saying, Priyanka. Can we move beyond reactive ways of measuring inclusion to looking at inclusion as it's taking place within the organization?
Absolutely.
Just understanding the sociometry and the social structure in that context. But Priyanka, you also spoke about something that's very beautiful, aspiration, about the future. And I'm going to take that conversation a little ahead and beyond an organization. So when it comes to inclusion, what is the kind of world that we envision? What is the future that we want for an inclusive world? And how do we make the world a more inclusive place to create a future like that? So what are your thoughts on that? I know you're very passionate about this. So I would really like you to, share from your heart, what is it that you feel about this?
Okay, so I think, Mishti, like how charity begins at home, right? So inclusion also begins at home. And I tell this to everyone. And when I say home, it actually begins with us, you and me and everyone here. So I think it starts with accepting yourself the way you are and learning to love yourself the way you are. And, as I said earlier, with all my flaws and with all my imperfections. So that's how you get inclusive of yourself. And only when you become an ally to yourself, right? And you stand for who you are, right? And you stand for what you believe in, will you start including others and be inclusive of yourself? So that's why it just starts with us, ourselves. And there's something which works for me. I don't want to sound preachy, but uh, we spoke about bias, right, earlier,
Yes.
and all those things that run in our minds. So I've had my own biases, for or against people, and I mean they were not nice. So what I do is I just try and suspend, that judgment or opinion about something. I remind myself I don't have to have an opinion on everything. No one needs it basically. So I can just keep it to myself and live with it. So that's one thing. So I pause that judgment. I pause jumping to the conclusion. It's unnecessary. It's just a baggage. We need to get rid of it. Second thing, again, things that I'm just talking about. It's based on my own experience of how I was judged, or I faced bias, or how I used to have biases for people. I used to go by first impressions. I have stopped doing that. I don't. I just tell myself again. I've put it all around me. Post-its, whatever it works. On the fridge, on my study table. That don't go by first impressions. About anything, about people, culture. I'm married to a South Indian, right? To start with, I had bias against people. My family had. So simple. I mean, for them, everybody was a Madrasi down south. My husband was a Malayali, was a Madrasi. Things like that, right? So it's about don't let those stereotypes rule your life. So don't go by first impressions about anything. Stop labeling people. It's okay. She's an introvert. She's shy. Look at her. Look at her hair. So it's about again holding on to yourself and telling yourself don't have an opinion on everything. It's not necessary. Be curious about people. I consciously try to ask people about them. Not getting intrusive, but in a nice way. I try. I'm learning. Not doesn't come naturally. I hate to say it, but knowing how I am, it's not very easy for me to be curious about people. I keep it to myself, and I used to take that whole live and let live to another extreme. I would just leave people, whatever. So yeah, and it's about also having conversations which bring you out of your comfort zone. It could be anything. So I have started doing that with my son. I mean, he's growing. He's in his teens, and I think it's time that he sees his world a little more gender neutral world. Where things are where people don't talk about, okay, this is for men, this is for women, and this is how the LGBT community talks like. So I really don't want him to grow up with those things. And you could talk about anything. The idea is to have those uncomfortable conversations, conversations that you would not have otherwise. So get conscious about them. Talk about privileges. I mean, I talk about privileges with my friends now. I mean, I would never think of doing that, say, 10 years ago. I mean, we exchange notes on all the privileges that we have lived with all our lives. And I also hear things like, so should I apologize for this privilege? So it's not about apologizing or feeling guilty about the privileges, but I think it's just about being grateful for everything that we have, and seeing that it's your privileges helping somebody else. I mean, yeah. So, I think that's what, will finally one day make the world more inclusive when we start including ourselves and open our world to others around us.
It's beautiful, Priyanka.
Yeah.
I think standing up for ourselves, respecting ourselves, and including ourselves is definitely the starting point. And what you said, not jumping on to conclusions. So the more you slow down, your
I mean,
thinking
we
and
Indians love doing that, right? Whether it's
yes.
neighbors, whether it's neighbors' dogs, we have to like comment on every single thing.
So yeah, so I feel
We go from
mindfulness.
inclusion to intrusion.
Yes. Right.
Very good one.
Yes, yes. Yeah, with the mantra of advice is very strong in us, giving advice is very
Yeah,
important. But then I'm not going to talk about this because we are bringing our implicit biases here then.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So we
On
Yeah.
have
full
to
display.
on full
Yes,
display. So
absolutely. I
I'm
just
being
did that.
I'm being mindful of our biases. So to that point, I just want to say one thing is that in order to understand our own implicit or explicit biases, one good approach is to slow down your thinking. We were
Absolutely.
talking about the number of items in your head you can contain. The short-term
Yeah,
memory is just 7. So you're already
exactly.
overloaded with information. Then you're pushed to
Yeah.
operate from biases.
Yes.
So it's very important you to use mindfulness or just slow down your thinking. Just take the pause and then figure out which space you're operating from. And awareness is transformation. I think we have around 20 minutes left. So 15 minutes left actually. So what I would suggest is we were planning to have sharing in a different format, but I know a lot of you must be wanting to ask more questions and share your experiences because that's the power of a circle. It has two outcomes. It motivates and it engages. So whatever is coming up for you, I would invite our beautiful audience here to share, ask, and create a forum of empowered sharing. Okay, so and we would like to include all of you. We'll try as much as we can. Yeah, around 10 minutes are there. So please do feel free to share, ask, seek, however you may want to put it. Anyone has any questions, you
So
could.
here's a quick way of getting this done. Many of you have asked questions while registering or in the chat. Now's the opportunity to either ask that question or to share your insight or opinion that you want to bring to it. And if you want to do it in an orderly way, which allows us all to get a turn, use the raise hand feature. Right at the bottom, there's this that you will see on Zoom. Click that, and that will take as an indicator that you want to be heard. Thank you, Shweta Niyati. All right, I'm going to allow, who wants to do the picking? Mishti, Gurleen, who wants to do the picking?
So I think we'll go with whoever's raised their hands first. So was it Shweta?
Shweta.
So yeah, so Shweta, over to you.
Hi, I think this is not a question, but just a comment. I just want to compliment, OD interventions for this session. And, the speaker, Priyanka. I just want to comment that, as DEI professionals, a lot of times we get into the programming and project bit of it, and we sometimes don't start with self. So I think this session was very, very refreshing from that perspective. A lot of insights, and I do follow, and I know Santosh is on this call. So hi, Santosh. I do follow a lot of your articles around the social capital bit. So I love the way we could link the employee resource groups bit and how, the whole org lens and networking piece. So just want to compliment this kickoff session. And the only thought or this may be a question for Priyanka to really share her thoughts. It's not around some of the points you shared, Priyanka, but it's something I struggle as a diversity professional. So I always struggle with the fact that in India, our legislatory framework is very, very weak around the representation and inclusion. Like if you compare it to a US, there's so much of a legislatory framework there around affirmative action plans and many laws which sort of are like watchdogs to for corporates. um, and while I am very, very fortunate, like how you said, IBM has a legacy of 100 years. I work with an organization which is very similar. But when I do advocacy around this, with other Indian organizations or peers, I do realize that, we don't have a legislatory framework. And as a society, we have a long way to go. And like you said, it's so interlinked. The workplace is interlinked to the society, right? So do you also feel that? And do you also sort of, any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Sweta.
Thank you, Shweta. So, Shweta, see, this is what I think, right? See, we have to understand the enormity of the problem, right? So it's not only a business problem that we're trying to solve when we look at DEI, right? I mean, it's not only some metrics or things that we need to put in place. It's you're dealing with how the society works in India, right? And there is there is a lot that goes on in the society, right? And and you're dealing with people, you're dealing with their mindsets, behaviors, and how they do things. So as organizations, we should always remember that it's something like a DEI can never have a fix overnight. In fact, there is no fix. The word is wrong. I should not use it ever. But it's a journey, right? So it's something which will happen. You just have to make a start right. Start right and go from there. As I said, right, you just have to figure what is it that you're trying to do, where your problem is, and try to make sure that you make progress from there. And we all are like any situation, not just organizational, right? Even at personal life, we will always have constraints. So what you talked about are constraints, and we have to live with them. Today you have these constraints around how the organizations, government, how your legislations are, right? Tomorrow there could be some other constraints, right? So we keep the constraints, we keep them in our minds, and we go ahead with them. So that's what I say. I mean, we will always have something or the other which takes us 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. We just make sure that we move 3 steps forward next time.
Right. Thank you, Priyanka.
I think Niyati, would you like to say something?
Yes, hi, hello. A lot of pointers that I could take away from this discussion is one, I would start with when Aman said inclusion is more of a feeling, right? So when it is not an activity. Like I have seen a lot of people in the senior positions say that, okay, inclusion is as good as, if I talk about a very simple example, I am doing my job, but probably somebody in the product team didn't take my inputs. Okay, I was not asked for my input when it was required for the team management, etc., etc. And my boss will be like, "हाँ तो उससे जाके sort कर लो." And it's not about sorting; it's about his or her willingness to come and ask for my input. That level of inclusion, that's a feeling that you get. Like, I really wanted to look at that. And also a very amazing point that Priyanka made was being open to challenging yourself again, like your comfort zone. Like it is not about diversity, inclusion, or saying of figuring out all these things as an activity in the organization. It's more about I am so comfortable around my kind of people. So I don't challenge my position. I don't want to, people talk about growth. Now, growth will only happen when this is. So
my point here, Priyanka, is do we say that while we say diversity and inclusion that we want to talk about in organizations, are we also urging people to push them out of their comfort zones, like on an individual level too?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's very important, right? And uh, even when you keep the whole diversity and inclusion concept aside, and if you have to think from, say, a business leader's perspective, right? So, I mean, they're always looking for the best of the ideas, the most creative ideas, and something which is totally out of the box, which is a term which is overly and misused and abused. But I think we come up with the most creative ideas only when we push ourselves, right? I mean, otherwise it's like BAU every day, right? And you get very transactional. So if even in our personal lives, if we want to do something differently, we really have to start pushing ourselves. It could be pushing ourselves little, very little, and then little by little, so that we get used to that whole uh, you know and it's, I think I would say, it's not a push, it's just a nudge. So nudging yourself out of your comfort zone, very gently. Tell yourself that you're there with yourself, and start thinking differently, and yeah, and this whole idea of pushing or coming out of this comfort zone it's very essential or foundational to the whole the diverse and inclusive world that we want to bring in and foster, because I mean, that's how you start accepting people who are different from you, right? And from acceptance move to respecting them and embracing them. I don't want to use those, again, widely misused terms, but it's just about welcoming people the way they are, and not everybody is like you or me, right? And yeah.
So true, so true. Thank you, Priyanka.
Thank you, Neeti. Vishali?
Yeah, thank you, Mishti. I just wanted to add to what Niyati was saying when she said, asking about it, so, or asking for things. So, I was just reminded of an incident when one of my conversations with one of the CEOs went in a similar line, where he said that, Vishali, don't expect to be invited. So I was complaining. I said, how come you guys have your business review meetings and there are times when we get left out, or I get left out? So he was, and I also was carrying my own bias. That was the time I was working with Mr. Anil Ambani. So they thought that this is chairman's office, like sort of, and I thought that they were purposely keeping me out because they thought this is like, corporate office, and they must be having their own conversations inside. And when I complained to him, he said, Vishali, don't expect to be invited. All you need to do is just barge in. So I was like, okay. So, and that was a typical male way of working, where we women kind of use thank yous and please and permissions, and men just ask. So I think that's also one of the key things which Priyanka had mentioned earlier, that, you simply have to also step up and stand for yourself, believe in yourself, and ask. And I think things can then move. So that
Yes,
was
absolutely, Vishali. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, right? So, when we talk to our employees, especially women employees, we tell them, just go ask for what you deserve, because one, no one is going to, because, and I don't even like to use a narrative, because people are so busy that, they will not really bother inviting you or calling you, right? Because that's a very wrong thing to say. But as women, I think if something holds us back, we should just make sure that that barrier is not there, and we ask for what we deserve, whether it's a new role, expansion of role, whether it's a raise, whatever it is. I mean, we should just go and ask for it.
I mean, that's a great point that you made, because I was just thinking about this being the other point. We don't negotiate, right? Or we're not as good in negotiating for ourselves as perhaps men are. I mean, I think because either out of the way the structures are, or the policies are, or whatever else, they're more confident. So I think that's
and there is another reason, why we are not as good as men in negotiating, because someone has just told us that women are not good at negotiating. Because I don't know, right? I mean, I don't see a research which says that, right? But the stereotypes and the conditioning that we've had over the years have told us that this is something which you're not good at. So So it's kind of ingrained, right? That, it's like someone keeps telling me. In fact, it's happened with me. I was not, I don't know how I was, when I was a kid, in maths, but someone kept telling me, oh, you're not good at maths. You're not good at maths. I turned out bad in maths, simple,
You start
because,
believing in it.
yeah. And then, so it's like that, right? So, and who says that men are good at negotiating? I know men who are really bad at negotiating as well,
It's perception.
next to other things, right? But the stereotypes just tell us that this is not what you're good at. So don't try your hands on it, you'll fail. So we just need to break that thinking.
That's
I
interesting.
think thanks for adding that. If you'll allow me to quickly weigh in on that, I just wanted to build on that perspective that you brought, Priyanka. So, you're right. There are men who may also hesitate to barge in because it's not part of their personality. Similarly, there may be women who may not, like barging in. And while it is one thing to tell somebody saying, hey, you know what, don't wait to be invited. I think as leaders and as leaders who bring a little bit of understanding of human behavior to their work, it may be important to know that my saying it once will not automatically translate into a transformation in the other person.
Absolutely, yeah.
So part of leadership and part of building inclusive culture is to tell somebody, hey, please feel free to walk in. But also it is
Absolutely.
important to understand, is to take a lens to your own style and say,
Yeah.
okay, do I actively invite people? Am I actively inclusive, or am I just being inclusive of those people who barge into my office?
Exactly. I mean, very fair point, Aman. And this is what we look for, inclusive leaders. They consciously include. They are conscious about their actions and the impact their actions are having on people, right? Because yeah.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, for example, part of my upbringing is that wait to be invited, right?
I mean, most of us, I would
stru-
say, yeah.
yeah, and I struggle because I I found it very funny that there are times when I came across colleagues who would barge in, and I would look at them and think, wow, what is this person doing? And that's my bias coming into play. So being very conscious as a leader of, okay, what are my biases? What comes from my conditioning, and can I adapt my style a little bit to be welcoming of every style? Be welcoming of the barger in, to be welcoming of the shy person, and doing things like that. So just wanted to
Absolutely.
bring that lens.
No,
Yes.
that's a very, very fair point, very well brought up. And I really liked how you started this, Aman, that not, I mean, again, it's a bias that we feel that, okay, all men will be ready to barge in, right? So that's again a bias that we have, maybe we women have, because that's because that's
Absolutely.
ingrained in us. And I mean, it's ironic that we see that even men face so much of bias, and it's
Totally.
And you know what
something,
this
yeah.
is? I'm so kicked about this because when we said we want inclusion circles to be a safe space where we can actually tackle diversity and inclusion issues, with to paraphrase Obama, with audacity, to kind of to take a lens to all these things. And today here we are talking about, okay, we practitioners and professionals and advocates may have our own biases, and let's talk about it openly.
Yes,
So
it's
I'm quite
wonderful.
excited.
Yeah, it's wonderful to, start with owning your biases. And Vishali, what you were saying, and Priyanka, what you were saying is because of the stereotypes that are there. When we spoke about negotiation, there's a very funny stereotype that is there that women are very good at bargaining, but they're bad at
Yeah.
negotiation. Now, in principle, if you're good at bargaining, so you know the basic strategies, right? So you would be good at negotiation also. So I think a lot of these stereotypes come from the society and social
Yeah.
conditioning. And
Yeah.
as women, because you were talking about that, we should not shrink ourselves, because the initial response is to shrink yourself.
Yeah.
But it's important to make your presence felt and remove the dar from gender.
Absolutely, very well said.
Yes.
True.
Celebrate yourself as a professional, however you are. It's these unique competencies that you bring to the table. Unfortunately, it is
Gigi,
6:30 and we have so many people still sharing in. So what do we
Mishti,
do?
if I may,
क्या करें
if
अमन?
I'm, yeah, I just wanted to say Shiji is the only hand that we had up. and, for a while. So, you're right to acknowledge that those of us who had budgeted only till 6:30 may want to jump off.
Yes.
So, but we are here, and we'd like to continue to hear what you have to say. So, one last point, if we can take Shiji.
Yes, one last point, and then we move towards closing.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank, and I wanted to say that this entire statement around inclusion as a phenomena here and now looks like a brilliant research area. I'm an academician, I'm a researcher. So I just wanted to add this little bit, because I also feel that to make our workspaces inclusive, we have to start with academics. It has to start with the educational institutes. It happened with me that I was teaching DNI course. I mean, I was teaching organizational behavior where we discussed about DNI, and I stepped out and a student came to me saying that, ma'am, you discussed entire concept of DNI without even talking about LGBT. This was years back, and I realized that I have my phobia around talking about that, and that's where I got into LGBT research with all my biases in place. And even today when I do my research, I still know that I have my biases in place, but every time I talk about my research to my students, I know that their minds are opening up. I know that now they are becoming comfortable talking about certain aspects. So I think as we work in workspaces, maybe that extension or a collaboration between academia and industry in terms of diversity and inclusion would be a brilliant idea to make things really work out. Thanks.
Wonderful. Lovely, Shiji. Shweta is also, I think, one last question or sharing from Shweta, because her hand has been up, and then we can move towards closing the circle. Shweta, would you like to say something?
I think that was from before she.
Okay,
Yeah, I
that
think
was
that's
from
the
before.
that's the old
Okay,
hand.
that's the old hand. All right. Yes, that's the hi-fi hand.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
think I
So,
just want to
yes.
thank Aman for inviting me in, and I'm sorry I just have to very quickly drop off, but I've thoroughly enjoyed this session, and good luck for these inclusion circles. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for coming, Shweta, and we hope to have you here soon.
Yes, thank you, Aman. I look
Yeah.
forward. Bye. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Shweta. Thank you. So, thank you everyone for your precious time and for your beautiful sharing. I think that's the power of inclusion, and that's the power of inclusion circles. And before we close, I'm going to just hand it over to Gulleen and Aman. We started with music to, center ourselves and enable us to bring our whole selves to this forum. And we would want to end with music to celebrate inclusion. So over to Aman and Gulleen.
Thank you very much. So, in I'll give you a little history of why we're doing this. This is about bringing your whole selves to whatever you do, being authentic. Mishti is a creative person. She likes to bring a creative flavor. So we were talking, and she said, let's do something around music. And we're saying, why not? So we're going to close with some music, a little history about the piece of music that we're, going to close with. So in the early 80s, Africa, especially Ethiopia, was hard hit by famine, and there were millions of people dying. And at that time, a musician by the name of Harry Belafonte was inspired by what a group in the UK had done, and he wanted to do that in America. So he reached out to Quincy Jones, the producer, Lionel Richie, Michael Jackson, etc., and they got together all the top pop stars of that era, and they they wrote and performed an iconic song, and yeah, you're right, Vaishali, and that's the the idea was to reach out and do good, which is similar to what all of us want to do in our lives every day, and that's the song we've chosen this time. And on that note, over to Gurleen.
Thank you, Aman. Thank you for the amazing session, Priyanka. I'll be playing the song, and with that, I have pasted a link in our chat box. I would love if everyone could go there and possibly leave a comment as the first step they would want to take as inclusion catalyst. With that thought, here's the song. Enjoy and have a lovely day ahead.
And thank you so much, Priyanka, for your time. You've been wonderful, and your sharing was very inspiring for all of us.
I mean, thank you so much, Mishti. Thank you, Aman, Gurleen, Santosh. I mean, for getting me here.
Pleasure
Thank you for
indeed.
being here, Priyanka. You know, lovely conversation, lovely points you made. I mean, I got insights which I'll reach out and talk about personally.
I mean, learning for me.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Right, right.